Should you waive the appraisal? Keep it locked and I'll give you the real scoop. Hey everyone, Victor Chambers here. I'm a licensed real estate agent, investor, and entrepreneur in the Garden State of New Jersey. And on this channel, I'm bringing you tips, strategies, and advice to empower you on your real estate journey. So I was recently working with a buyer and I came across a scenario where that in order to get an offer on a property considered and ultimately accepted, there was a strong possibility that we would have to offer to waive the appraisal. So I thought it would be good to just offer my opinion and perspective on whether waiving an appraisal is a good strategy to getting an offer accepted. But first, if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. And don't forget to like and subscribe as I'll be releasing new videos here every single week. So let's talk about the appraisal. First, what is it? So during the home buying process, the lender or the bank providing the mortgage to the buyer will perform an appraisal. The appraisal is done by a third-party company and is an unbiased professional opinion of the value of the home. This is not to be confused with a CMA or comparative market analysis, which is commonly done by real estate agents. So the lender uses the appraisal to underwrite the actual value of the property. It ensures that they understand the value of the product or the home that they are lending on. So think of it this way, the bank needs to ensure that they aren't overexposing themselves from a risk standpoint and lending more money on an asset than what it is actually worth. It's funny because just the other day I heard someone refer to appraisers as the gods of real estate. And while I wouldn't exactly phrase it that way, appraisers definitely serve an extremely critical role in providing safeguards and standardizing the way real estate is valued. Okay, so now that we got some of the basics out of the way, let's get to the heart of this video. In a hot seller's market like we're in right now, particularly where there is a lot of demand and low inventory, it's not uncommon for buyers to encounter multiple offer scenarios, which often result in bidding wars. Now, as an agent representing a buyer, the goal is to ultimately get an offer accepted, leveraging price, terms, or both. Let's table the idea of price for the moment and talk about terms, specifically the appraisal. Now, to make an offer more appealing, a buyer and their agent may decide to waive the appraisal. Now, this does not mean that the appraisal will not actually be done, but it removes the ability of the buyer to negotiate the price later on based on the appraisal. Effectively, the buyer would be agreeing to pay any shortfall if there is one. Now, most real estate contracts are dependent on the appraisal, and in many cases, the buyer can decide to cancel the contract if the property does not appraise, or they can renegotiate the purchase price of the property. But in this specific scenario, we're talking about waiving the appraisal where the buyer may potentially have to pay any appraisal shortfall. So the best way to demonstrate this is an example. So let's say the buyer bid $350,000 on the property and the property appraises for $325,000. This means they would need to possibly come out of pocket the additional $25,000 difference. Now, in some cases, the buyer and seller can agree to split the difference, but in a hot seller's market where there is a lot of demand, many sellers may not actually have the appetite to do this, and so the buyer would have to fork over the additional cash. So let me show you the difference. Let's say the buyer is getting a conventional mortgage and putting 20% down. That means on a $350,000 property, they would be putting down $75,000 plus closing costs. However, in our example, if the property appraises for $325,000 and the purchase price of the property is $350,000, again, a $25,000 difference, the buyer would have to cover the $25,000 shortfall plus the 20% of the appraised value, which is $325,000. So 20% of $325,000 is $65,000 for a total of $90,000 plus closing costs. So that's $75,000 plus closing costs versus $90,000 plus closing costs. Now, this may be a simple example, and obviously there are other nuances and factors that can play into a scenario like this, but I just wanted to give you a simple example of the impact waiving an appraisal can have on the amount of cash a buyer has to bring to the table. So then let's talk about, from a buyer standpoint, what should be taken into consideration when pondering whether this makes sense as a strategy. The first thing is, how badly does the buyer want the house? Is this the perfect home, or is this their potential forever home? Is there no other property on the market that meets their needs such that they would even be willing to overpay for this property? Number two, does the buyer have substantial cash reserves? Now, substantial here is really relative to the buyer, the purchase price of the property, and the appraised value. But the question is whether the buyer has the cash reserves to potentially cover any appraisal shortfall, and whether they are willing to bring that additional cash to closing. The third thing to consider is whether or not this is really a smart investment. Are the values of the location of the property that the buyer is looking to buy in likely to appreciate or depreciate in the next 5 or 10 years, perhaps when they would consider moving? Or is this their forever home and they're less sensitive to short-term market changes that could affect the value of their home? If values are likely to depreciate in the next 5 or 10 years because of whatever market changes, and the buyer will then need to sell, their equity can be eroded, or worst case, they can end up underwater, i.e. owing more than the property is worth. Now, I covered this pretty quickly and gave what might be somewhat of a simple, straightforward example, but I just wanted to provide some insight on what waiving an appraisal means and how it can impact a real estate transaction, and whether buyers should consider that as a strategy when making offers on homes in a very competitive market. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found this information useful. Again, please consider liking and subscribing, and even commenting down below if you have questions about the home buying or home selling process, or if you're interested in investing in real estate. Until the next video, see you.